All right. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday. Thank you for tuning in. I've been looking forward to this all week and all day today. We're going to be talking about how to run for office. And with us today, we're incredibly privileged to have Erin Vilardi, who is the CEO of Vote Run Lead. Erin, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. How's your day today?
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, same here. On behalf of all IB members, we're very excited for this. So, um, just to get us started, let's zoom all the way out. And I'd love to hear your take on why it's important to run for office in the first place.
Well, we live in this representative democracy, but I can give you all of the pro-participation reasons why it's important. But at the end of the day, the resources that we have and sort of contracting community with one another are decided by our elected officials. Where our taxes get spent, where the money and investment goes in our community needs to be decided on by a group of people who are actually reflective of that community. And for a long, long time, what we've seen is a small handful of folks who are fairly homogenous really making those decisions about how we build infrastructure and everything from our roads and bridges to how we're making decisions about our global influence. And so I do this work because it's important to me that the folks who are making those decisions about where our resources and our talent and our money goes is really done by people who are reflective of those communities, because that's the job.
Absolutely. So on the one hand, it's all about the fact that these critical decisions are getting made. They should be made by a group of people that represent the population. I love that. And then on the other side of the coin, though, I'd love for you to go a bit deeper on, why should anyone choose to run for office, right? If they could just have a job that they love, or do something else, not for profit or in academia, science, why would you run for office? It seems like a very hard path. So what is the most important?
I mean, at the end of the day, there are limits to your power as a citizen. There are limits to what you can get done, to the change that you want to see, and the role that government plays. We have to get involved at that decision-making level, at that leadership level. And we see this more, we train women to run for office. That's our specialty, a real diversity of women. So we see this a lot with women who are like, well, can I just start a nonprofit to get this done, right? Well, if I want to, maybe I can lobby at the Capitol. For too long, we've been knocking on these doors, knocking on the halls of power. It makes a difference when you have a seat at the table. And some of the myths that it's not that hard to get elected in some of these local seats. You're talking about maybe 500 or 600 votes, or maybe your budget at the high end is $150,000, but it's all really doable, because at the end of the day, your power stops when you're a citizen. And if you really want to see something happen, and you want to see something happen quickly, as much as we talk about how government is a slow beast, it actually, in an election cycle and in maybe one legislative term, maybe two legislative terms, you can get real policy change made. And so compare it to other things like a 5-year nonprofit plan, or scaling a business. You can really see change happen in an election cycle.
I love that. And I totally agree. I think there's tremendous impact you can have through business, through the arts, through many, many different areas. Although ultimately, the decisions that impact millions of people on how the budgets are spent or where resources are allocated, policy
and it's
truly.
Everything from, like, you can do pro-business work, you can do downtown revitalization, you can do creating green spaces. I think there's been a bit of a sort of a secret propaganda machine to tell people that, like, government is slow and not innovative. The innovation is coming from the states. It's coming from these city councils. There's billions of dollars coming through county commissions. And it's like, no, don't be in politics. It's dirty. It's yucky. Meanwhile, we get to sort of have all the, access to capital and get to decide how things are working. If anybody watched, last summer when Facebook was in front of the Senate, it was like, oh my God, it's not just a sort of a diversity of, ethnicity and gender, but looking at the age disparities between some of these folks who were sitting up there and really not understanding how technology works. And so what would it mean to actually have a 30-something in the United States Senate, right? And really have a native understanding of how technology is just baked into our lives.
Absolutely. So it's if you can make it work, it's one of those things where you can impact millions of lives and faster than people perceive the speed of government. So you've got hundreds of alumni of your program who are currently in office. So you've been running this incredible initiative, and really excited to hear you share more about that with our members. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to hear your perspective on, regardless of the office, whether it's local politics or whether it's national level. What have you seen, having looked at all of your alumni who've succeeded, as well as your expertise in the field, as election cycles and so forth? What do you believe are the key factors that enable somebody to win? What does it take to win if you're running for office?
Right. So on a very practical level, you have to get more votes than the other guy, right? And so how we prioritize those votes is we think, I have to spend a lot of money, or I have to have the best digital ads, but the alumni that have made it through and gotten elected have done it with good old-fashioned bootstrapping, picking up their sneakers, knocking on their doors, talking to neighbors, like old school retail politics. No matter what, even in the age of digital outreach, which is, it has to be one of the pillars of your campaign. People have to know you and see you and touch you and like know that you're a real person who really wants to do this. So number one is a willingness to put in some hard work. If you're not a hard worker, then politics is not for you, right? It is one of those things where you might be getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you have events until 9 o'clock at night. So that's a short period of time when you're running a campaign. It does have that start and stop. You have to have something that you care deeply, deeply about, that you're willing to put in that kind of sacrifice to see it happen. And that doesn't have to be all the issues. You don't have to know and care about the full 25-point plan, but you have to have those one or two things that you are in office to change, because people want to see somebody who's ready to move the needle on an issue. They're ready to see somebody who really has passion. You have to be willing to ask for money as an investment in yourself. And this is something we see really gendered. So women often are great fundraisers and are good at asking for money for a bunch of other causes. They're often the head of nonprofit fundraising. But when it comes to asking for money for ourselves, we beat around the bush a little bit. And so on some of the leadership skills we want to actually instill is that this is about an investment in you and trust in you. And so that fundraising knack is not necessarily, like, we all know how to raise money. It's not the most fun thing, right? But it's a requirement. But getting that mental space shifted around, this is really an investment in who I am and my ability, really helps to sort of open up that avenue of money. And at Vote Run Lead, we talk about something called run as you are. You cannot be a political robot. You cannot be someone else running for office. And probably this is the number one thing that is most true for our alumni, is they were really their authentic selves. Now, that's an overused phrase. So we have built, after the 2016 election, when we saw a wave of women running, we rebranded and rebuilt our curriculum called Run As You Are. And it really means that the expertise that you have is your experience, whether that's 3 years experience or 15 years experience. And the power that you have is your personal story. And so, yes, you want to talk about, your education and your plan, but you have to be emotionally resonant with voters. And the only way you do that is by just being you. And luckily, that's actually something that voters are really responding to. And they are really tired of the kind of traditional, kissing babies, shaking hands, not really giving a full answer. And especially as you get down to the local level, people want to be able to trust you and have that emotional resonance, and then they'll actually remember what you said. If you can't get that kind of human connection, they're actually not going to remember anything of your 10-point plan. So the ability to tell a story is also something that we find has been with our alumni, that if you can tell a story, a quick one, a good one on the campaign trail about yourself, about your leadership, you're going to get people to trust you and go, okay, look, they did that as an entrepreneur, or they had success, building this business or starting this nonprofit or in their past job, or they raised X amount of money over here and they told me the story. We find that to be one of the best ways to break through the noise.
All right, love it. So those are 5 critical steps. And what I want to do is, before we move to the next question, I want to dive a little bit deeper in a couple of them, so we really, really get a sense of, what it takes.
Sure.
So the willingness to put in the hard work, you mentioned, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Let's just do a little bit more, because I want people to also viscerally understand like what it means. And actually in the context of like, not just like, oh, it's really hard, but how critical it is that you truly are passionate about those one or two causes to get you through. Because similar to an entrepreneur building a business or whatever, it takes like great effort. Usually the conviction is what drives it. So just want you to, if you have any like story of like what the grind is really like, and the kinds of people who have the requisite conviction to get there.
So the grind, you have to be a learner. You have to be like willing to be a lifelong learner in this process, because you have voters who are coming at you with ideas. You're going to have some policy people who, if you make it to the city council, here's the 5 things I want you to implement when you're there. So as part of that journey, you're meeting a lot of people who have a lot of wants from you and needs from you. So you have to be able to sort of process that information and say, I want to hear more about that. Let me get back to you, right? And organize how that information comes in and like who may or may not be an expert. So really figuring out how that wave of stuff comes at you. How do you organize yourself to make sure that all your energy isn't spent like just being on the receiving end, and giving yourself some time to actually process those new ideas that come your way, or the new access to new groups of people that come your way. There's an element of resilience and understanding yourself in this. So if you know that at 5 o'clock you want to be home for your kids, or you want to tuck your kids in at 8:30, then you have to build that into your campaign plan. Because if you get burnt out, just like in starting a small business, nobody wants to be on the campaign trail with you. There's a little bit of like managing a team. You usually have a small team when you're working at a local or state legislative at race. And so one is both the delegation to a campaign manager, or 2, maybe it's just you managing 3 other people. And so really kind of tuning up some of those management skills that you've had to use in other sectors, while also being the front of the house. So there's that combination of, while you're the candidate, people want access to you, but you also still have to motivate your team. So CEOs know this, founders know that. That's that little bit of that magic in that daily grind. I'm thinking of Lauren Underwood, who is the youngest African-American woman ever elected to the United States Congress just this past election cycle, an alumni of Vote Run Lead. And what she did is she's got, I think, 7 counties. She's just outside of Chicago. And they told her, as an African-American woman in a red district, to only go to the Chicago cut and just turn out Black voters. And what she decided to do was to go to all of the 7 counties, of which I think 5 are considered rural. And that's the kind of hard work I'm talking about. A little bit of innovation, not taking bad advice, right? A couple people told her that, and she was like, that's politics as usual. I'm going to do things differently because I want to be a different kind of candidate. So went on that early listening tour, hit all 7 counties, went to the diners where she was, very much didn't look like the rest of the people eating lunch that day. Willingness to listen to those people and take that information in and connect and get back to them. She had some early folks on her campaign that, as things ramped up, she needed to kind of ramp up the expertise. And so she had some transition on her campaign team, handled that really well. So she's a good example of somebody who, just trusted her instincts, really listened to her community around the economic policies, put in the hard work, got a good pair of flats, got a good pair of sneakers, and was really able to do that kind of connection with the voters, where people were like, okay, I'm going to take a chance on somebody new.
All right. Love that. I love also the front of house, back of house. When you're the candidate, you are the CEO of your campaign. You have to manage, your customers as well as the people who are getting you to the next level. So I appreciate that. Now on the second grouping of the kind of key next steps you gave for how to win, you talked a lot about this incredibly inspiring message, actually, like run as you are, which is, you can apply that to any field, right? But in politics especially, it's almost a little counterintuitive, unfortunately, based on how people perceive politics. So, to what extreme do you take that? Because I love what you're saying. I believe in it. It makes sense that people want to connect with someone real and authentic. At the same time, right, we're all human. We are all very acutely aware of, ideally we're acutely aware of what we don't know, the experience we don't have, all the reasons, that we may not be qualified. At the same time, maybe we are super passionate about these things. How does one balance like the conviction and the authenticity needed with the very fact that, I mean, there is no perfect human anyway,
Right.
let alone a younger human who, you know, has a lot to learn. So how do you balance that for the candidates that you prepare?
So the, Run As You Are is really about unleashing what it is you already have, right? Because if you're trying and going into like a debate, or you're going to give your spiel in front of the firefighters and you're trying to be something you're not, it is going to be so transparent to those folks. And so one, it's giving yourself permission to sort of be yourself, which is actually freeing. You're going to find that your shoulders are more relaxed, your voice is more powerful, right? It will have that sort of physiological effect on you that, if you're but it also means like, if you have to show, if you hate wearing a suit, fine, don't wear a suit, right? But make sure you look professional. So coupled with Run As You Are is know your audience. So if you're going to the Chamber of Commerce, you need to look sharp, right? If you're going to talk to the activists, you might be able to, show up in jeans and a blazer. Like I have women who, for example, we had a woman run for state senator in Maryland, and the party told her to change her hair. She's a veteran, mother of 5, and she had those purple dips, of the bottom of your hair. And her whole campaign was the change you can see. Her look was purple, and they told her that she couldn't run with purple hair. And she just sort of melted and wasn't able to show up places. She didn't like the way she looked every day. We had a phone call, and she was like, that's it. I'm dyeing the hair back. All of a sudden she was gearing up. She only lost by a few points. She'll run again. And now she's known as that sort of energetic woman with purple hair, and she has a lot more political capital in the community. So now when she went to show up in certain places, did she bring her like jacket from the Air Force? Yes. Right. When she was in front of a predominantly male audience, like she knew how to show up in different ways, but still be herself. So it doesn't mean you're just, one way all the time. It means that you're making sure that you're staying true to yourself while you know your audience.
I love that. Yeah, that balance, I think, summarizes it very well. Like, be yourself, because you're expert on the things that you know and who you are. At the same time, don't ignore the fact that you're talking to different kinds of people, which are different. So I think that says it very nicely.
Now, it also means like if you're first generation immigrant, you speak with an accent, you want to wear traditional clothing, like then you need to do that, right? If that is what's going to make you feel the most powerful, then you need to show up in like your spaces doing that and representing yourself. That, sometimes the clothing thing, that's one of the things we want to be like, I don't want folks to be like, oh, you must dress in sort of this Western, right? But it also means that there's an opportunity for you to have that conversation then, like be that conversation starter, right? So we have Muslim American women who are running for office wearing the hijab. Great. You have to be prepared to have those conversations so you can prep on that. You know that that's coming at you, right? How do you want to be able to like use a little humor to transition? How do you want to be a conversation starter? So being really thoughtful, like I said, that sort of lifelong learner, knowing that these things are going to come at you. What do you want your response to be? You can be prepared for the scenario building.
Love it. Thank you, Erin. So now I want to go from we've started high level on like why this is important, what does it take to win, now getting to very practical, like planning or even thinking about this in a tangible way. Could you walk us through what are the options for somebody looking to run for office? Of course, everybody dialed in here knows a number of offices that they can name, but I'd love for you to start actually from the ground floor and take us all the way up to just give us a quick overview of like what are the offices that people should consider running for, what's available out there.
So there are 519,682 elected offices in America. 519,682. I have it here on my, 90,000 school board seats. There are like 100,000 municipal seats across the country. County commissions, right? So at your basic level, in big cities, you have things like community boards that you can actually run for, or neighborhood councils like in LA and New York City. The next level up is usually at municipal level. So are you organized at a city level? You have your school boards, and the school board districts might be small or big, actually, depending on where you live and how large they cover. Your counties have a structure. So your county boards and your county commissions, not enough of us are actually looking at those county commissions. Billions of dollars come through the county commission. They really do a lot of infrastructure building. They're actually pretty well-paying jobs too. They can end up being full-time jobs, whereas a city council is, you show up Monday night, you read your packet over the weekend, and you do, some of your community events and office hours, but it's not necessarily in many places a full-time job. State legislatures around the country too are often only at a January to May cycle. So it's important if you're looking at the state legislature, the state Senate, that you do have something else revenue-wise, right? That you do have a consulting gig, or this is good too for small business owners who can sort of step away, or if you do work at a nonprofit, really working with your boss to figure out what that means for you to be away from January to usually May. And then finally, of course, you have your statewide offices, your state treasurer, there's these sort of citywide offices too, like controller, where like if you have good budgeting experience, that your mayoral and electoral positions, and then of course your executive positions like a state governor. And we all know about Congress, right? Like, yes, it's great when you do run for Congress, but this is actually where the innovation happens. This is where you get to test out things in small communities. This is where your neighbors get to see the impact that you make. This is also where you have less oversight, right? Like if you really want to do something different and cool, you want to create that green space, you want to do something around, I don't know, you've got like a whole district in your community that nobody's using, and you want to turn into like an entrepreneurial hub. That's what you can do at the local level. That just happens in a way where you can work with federal agencies, you can work with state agencies, but you can really move a lot quicker when you're doing local work.
Got it. So that was a great overview, but even for me, it was like a little bit fast in terms of like, for somebody really thinking about what to do. So you mentioned school boards, municipal, city.
Okay, so those are just the offices. So the first thing you should do, and I have a great tool for you, is like, where can I run for in my area? Because you're bound by geography when it comes to politics, right? You can move home, which is always something to consider, especially our urban folks who come from rural communities or places where there's been a brain drain. If you're thinking about running for office, what would it actually mean to move home and run for office there? I have a good friend who moved from New York City to South Carolina, and she has much greater influence in South Carolina, where she is participating with the party. She's now the party treasurer, and she's going to run for office there. So if you're thinking about running for office, you're bound by your geography about what you can run for. So we have a partnership with a group called Nation Builder, and Nation Builder has tens of thousands of offices in their database. They're supposed to have all of 500,000 of them by the end of the summer. So we'll share this link, but I think it's voterunlead.runforoffice.org, and you will type in your address and it will kick back to you all the things that you can run for and the year that those seats are open, which that's really cool, because you're like, oh, I didn't know that judgeships were elected in my community. Great. I have a legal background, I went to law school, but I'm doing something different, right? That seems like an office I can run for. The other thing we tell folks, besides like what office and where you can have that impact, is what do you care about, and at what level does that get legislated? And so that's going to take a little bit of Googling for you, a little bit of just kind of seeing and reading more in your local newspaper about what the city council is doing. If you care about transportation, you can do that at a city level, you can do that at a state level, but just making sure that the things you care about, that you can do that impact at that particular office. You want to take a look at who's in office. You might find that you really love that person and you don't want to run against them. You more likely are to find that you don't love that person and they have not had an opponent for the last 5 election cycles. And so that's a real advantage to considering running and jumping in. You have to know your story. So in politics, it's called know your why. And so that when someone says, why are you running for office? You're really able to answer that in a 10 to 15 second clip, and you're able to give the beautiful narrative about how you came to it as well. And so really tapping into that, we've got great resources on knowing your why. And we'll share those with you following this webinar that really digs into what your motivation is for making yourself a public figure, right? Because people are like, hey, you're crazy. You want to do this thing? You want to be an office holder? Give me the reason why I should trust you, than not some of these other self-serving guys. So that's on the front end. What office might be open and available to you in your area? Are you willing to move? can you answer the question about why you're running? And do you want to run against that person, right, in your community? The next thing to look at is how much money did someone spend on that election? You might find locally that it's just $2,500. You might also find that low voter turnout in your community means that for a school board seat, it was 600 votes. And all of a sudden, this stuff becomes really more doable. Yeah, I can knock on, 600 doors to get 1,200 votes, right? Like, you can do the math. The good thing about politics is, no, it isn't rocket science. It is that combination of, hustle and knowing your community. And you can get these numbers from your, it's good to connect with your party. If you don't want to go the party system, Nation Builder is another one of these folks that has resources about voter turnout in your community. So are you a Republican living in a Democratic district, and you're going to have to get creative about how to make that happen? Are you a Democrat living in a rural district that maybe never had a Democratic opponent prior, and maybe you have weak Democratic infrastructure in your community? So start to dig into some of that. One resource that we built right after the 2016 election, when a wave of women were raising their hand to run, is called the 90-Day Challenge. And the 90-Day Challenge has 30 actions to take in 90 days. And of course, it's like an accordion. You can, do it over the next 6 months if you want. But it's everything from, getting your social media in order, making sure that Twitter handle is available for, Erin for council, right? It's also having coffees and making human connections with folks in your community. Are you on the right list? Should you be doing $25 donations to some of the candidates to make sure you're receiving that information? So there's some baby steps in there. And then there's some big stuff that's like, hey, email your party chairman and tell them you want to run for office. So hopefully that felt a little more tangible.
Love that. I mean, so actually you kind of anticipated my next question, which was like, what are the practical next steps you should take? And obviously one of the key steps was the question before, which is, okay, what office do I even run for? Right. What I want to do is, you mentioned a lot of incredible resources. We will certainly send out an email after this so that everybody gets this in written form. But while we're all here, I want to quickly take a minute, and after this, I'm going to open it up to the audience, but let's try to prioritize these steps in order, because it sounds like there's a lot of resources. I'm just thinking like, okay, if someone's really fired up and then there's all these resources, sometimes it's hard to know, where do you even begin? So you mentioned very briefly, like, reach out to your political party if you want to, join a party.
Do not have that be your first step.
Okay, so
exactly, about, like,
where does that begin? So where do you begin? To me, it felt like know your why is probably a good place.
Know your why is number one.
Yeah.
Take some time with yourself with a pen and paper, and ask yourself, like, what can I do in public office that I'm going to be really proud of, right? That's one good prompting question. Who is somebody that inspires me, and what leadership quality do they have? Name that leadership quality, and then think of a time that you exuded that leadership quality. Because what's going to happen in your mind is you're going to actually see a pattern of your own leadership and how you behave as a leader. And then from that, you're going to be like, oh, I see why some of these things along my journey have really prepared me to run for this school board seat. Yes, I care really deeply about education, but part of why I'm doing this is because I believe that, students need to have a more robust, both physical education, curriculum, and, healthy lunches, and that we're not giving kids a really holistic education. And all the work I've done over the years is really about pulling these different groups of people together to provide a large platform. And you'd see the pattern. I'm using that as an example. It's not a great one, but if you're somebody who's pulled together different groups and been able to make things work, you're going to see that is tied to the policy priorities that you care about. By just doing some self-reflection and asking yourself, when did you show these leadership qualities? When were you really successful? And then tying that with what you care about, it's going to just reveal itself, and those are your stories. Then those are the things you actually talk about on the campaign trail. So my national training director talks about when she was community organizing with women who, teenage moms, right? And she had dropped off this woman at her retail job, and she was also bringing her child to work with her, and her kid was going to hide in the dressing room, right? And she like drove home crying that day because like she clearly hadn't helped this woman, right? If that's like what she has to do. And she realized that at that point, her activism on this stuff wasn't enough, that this was a public policy issue and that she was going to run for the legislature. You know, she figured out that that's where that policy needed to come from. And it was a motivator for her. So it's those kind of stories where you're like, oh, okay, I see why you want to run for office. So knowing your why, digging in. Number 2, talk to your friends and family. Now, talk to your friends and family, the ones who are going to say, yes, that's so awesome. We know who that family member is who's going to say, that's crazy, don't do that, right? Don't talk to that family member. Don't talk to that friend. Talk to your network of people who are willing to help you elevate to the next level. Have those conversations. Ask them if they're going to be with you. Ask them to, you know, share some times where you might have, you know, done something really powerful. Hey, I'm going through this exercise of just thinking about my past. You know, what do you think my leadership qualities are? So talk to your friends and family. If you're partnered up with someone, let them know that this is something you're thinking about and that, yes, your life's going to change a little bit, but you're going to work out what that is. Especially if you're a parent, you might want to talk to other parents who have done this before and how they manage their time during like campaign season. So friends and family is the right after know your why. And then number 3, for a lot of folks, especially young folks, it's what are the financial changes that are going to happen? Does it mean that your job is now going to be a part-time job? You know, what do you need to keep yourself financially stable and whole while you run for office? So that's a big one we see for millennials. You know, we don't have a lot of money in the bank just yet, right? Do I want to spend a certain amount of money on my campaign? So have that money conversation, both from hey, do I think I can raise $15,000? Yes, you can. But also, how else is my life going to be affected on an economic way? So those 3 things are the first to do.
Okay, love that. And then from there, using those as a launching pad. So know yourself, get the supportive people around you, and then think about the finances, because this is like almost a career decision, right? Like,
exactly.
And then from there, I guess for many, myself included, the question might be, okay, and where do I go? And so that's where what do I look at? So could you just round this out with, you know, in terms of like both the resources like Nation Builder to see what like 500,000 offices, as well as also the political parties. I mean, many people grow up in a household and they either rebel against it or go with it. But just curious, like for someone who hasn't just actually made their minds, how do they navigate the political spectrum and what's out there and triangulate to see where they should?
So one, like take a peek at the 90-day challenge, right? So it's everything from like start to follow reporters and journalists who care about the issues that you care about. So you're in the know about your like top 3 policy priorities in your community right now, right? Because when you do go talk to the party and you want to send them an email, you don't have to say you're thinking about running. When you send the email, you say, hey, when's the next event coming up? I want to get more involved. I'm activated, you know. So you can be a little bit vague about it. But when you show up, you know, you want to be able to know your stuff and sort of know what's happening in the conversation that's happening. You want to start asking people for coffees and say, I'm thinking about this, I'm exploring this. And so they're just like you would when you're going for like a job interview, right? So there's just that human connection of saying, hey, I've been thinking about this. Do you know who else might be running for this seat? And I would start to Google who your representatives are. And if you're looking for a city council seat, you might want to have a conversation with a school board member or with your state representative or who worked on their campaign that you might know in your like LinkedIn profile, and go and have that coffee. One of the challenges actually is to have 15 coffees. So if you have 7, you've done enough, because politics has also that little bit of intel that you're not going to get from just Googling. And then, you know, take a webinar or 2, whether it's with us or somebody else, on like, what are the basics of a campaign plan? Do I need a campaign team, right? Having that campaign manager role, do I have to pay a campaign manager? Not always, right? So really starting to actually put the skeleton of your campaign plan. What's my core message going to be? What's my campaign going to be? What was the voter turnout in the last election cycle? How many more votes do I want to get in order to like just play it safe? Having conversations with people who have that campaign background. This is an industry. There are folks that will do a consultation with you for a couple $100 so that you don't have to hire them for the whole time, right? And then you do want to, whether it's from Nation Builder, who's a nonpartisan or multi-partisan resource, or your party, you need to get the data on, is this a voter worth going and knocking on their door? And you know that because of the voter files. So The voter files thing is it gets a little bit messy. This is a conversation you want to have with a political expert. But basically it's like, I want you to spend the time talking to the voters who are most likely to vote for you. And that's the strategic part, right? You're not going to go, if you're a Republican, you're not going to go speak to a group of Democrats on a regular basis and get them to vote for you. You're going to speak to, independent voters, people who haven't made up their mind, maybe people who aren't registered, and your base. And it's that combination that gets you more votes than the other guy.
All right, got it. So this 90-day challenge definitely seems like it encapsulates a lot of things.
And you're working backwards, right? The nice thing about a campaign is you have your end date. And so like a project plan, if you've ever done project management, you're looking at your campaign and you're saying, who's the team I need to get it done? Who are the right people on the bus? How much money do I need to spend to do it? These are all skills we've used in other sectors so that we shouldn't think it's like too scary, right? We have these skills, we can transfer them over to the political realm.
All right, love that. So I wanna start with the audience questions. So what I'd encourage all IB members to do, first of all, thank you all again for participating. This is your chance to get one-on-one advice from Erin on how you want to take your next step. So if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. Please also write it under your name so that I can call on you and you can ask your question directly. So we have actually a question from an anonymous attendee that actually asked, like, is there a rule of thumb on how far in advance you should start planning if you intend to run? What do you think about that?
Right now, everything is on its head. So the advice we're giving is if the seat is open or it's a crowded primary, you should jump in now, even if it's a little late. So say you have a school board race that's happening, in the middle of June, right? Because these local elections happen all the time. I mean, the middle of August, right? And you've got 2 months to do it. It's worth doing it, and I'll tell you why. Name recognition, building political capital, building your list. Especially if the person does not have an opponent, it sets you up to be the person that the party selects next time around. So don't feel like you have to, if an opportunity has come up, it's a really great political environment right now to be jumping in. Voters aren't punishing people for jumping in late. So that's something if it's an opportunity that's come up. But if you're looking at like, hey, maybe 2020, in November 2020 for me for a state legislative seat, or maybe should I do it 2022? I am really of the mindset that, especially for a diversity of folks, which means people of color, women of color, you have to jump in now. The conversation is happening now. So if you're debating about whether to run in 2020 or 2022, you need to be doing that now, because here's the thing about races. You can always decide that you want to bow out. You can always lose in a primary, but what you've done is you've organized yourself. So you've gotten the community to know who you are. You've been through the exercise of like, hey, what's my platform going to be? Now you have political capital that you get to spend. So do you want to help support the guy who made it through the primary? Do you want to make sure that there are issues that get on your party platform? But there's so much political capital right now that's being spread out that you have to kind of grab at it. So it's good to spend a couple of months. Like if you're thinking about a 2020 state legislative race, you don't have to declare until next year. But what are you doing now to just kind of get a feel and to make sure that, hey, nobody else should run because I'm awesome. And, I'm just letting folks know that I'm really considering this.
Got it. Love that. So no time like the present.
Really, like it's true. It's true.
All right. We have another question. The question is, what are your suggestions for running for office in areas that are solidly liberal, but you're conservative? And also vice versa, I would say.
Yes.
What about the other way around? So essentially, what if the geography you want to have an impact has traditionally different views than the ones that you hold? What's your advice for people who are looking to do that?
Here you have to be willing to lose. So this is one where that first time around, you may not, you're going to make a dent and you're going to be a conversation starter, but you're probably not going to be the winning candidate. So be strategic about, of course you always run to win, but you have to know in the back of your mind that if it's, one of these districts where you're going to maybe get 15 or 20% of the vote, because it's just, at the end of the day, it's a blue city and you're the only conservative running, you have to know that that's going to happen, and you have to pick one thing that's going to be like your message through that campaign, right? So one, you're going to help build the party infrastructure no matter what what that is. And you get a lot more capital inside the party as well when you're willing to be the person. So one, what you're doing is you're setting up the infrastructure for the party to kind of like regrow. And, you know, the woman I talked about in South Carolina, there haven't been Democratic opponents in this region in South Carolina for years. And so what she's actually doing is they're running candidates, but they're actually rebuilding the party infrastructure. And it gets to be in the vision of like young people. So that's one thing I would say is be willing to know that you're going to not make it, but what is that one conversation starter that you want the media to cover, that you want to be known for, that you want the party to maybe shift on, right? That like young people can give a fresh approach. And you have to give voters a choice, right? So even though you may not win, what you're doing is giving voters a choice, and that's a much healthier democracy.
Got it. So it all boils down to if you want to be that person who's going to go right against the grain, against the odds, then really know why are you doing that? What's the message you're trying to get across?
And you might also be able to tap into some national resources there if you're willing to take that risk. Actually, I find that Republicans do this better than Democrats with the sort of risk takers. Contact the national or state party and be like, I'm going to do this. And you might find that you get a bundle of resources to have a much bigger impact than you thought. So don't be afraid if you're, running against the grain in your community to tap up a little bit higher if you don't have that party infrastructure at the city or county level.
All right, great advice. Be resourceful and knock on the doors to help you get there. So got two questions here that are kind of related, so I'm going to combine them. What are your thoughts on running for Congress, having never run for office? And then how much money would you recommend to have to successfully run for a Congress seat in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, I think in New York, you're talking about a minimum $1 million campaign, right? And yes, we have alumni right now who are running for Congress in New York City. We have an alumni who's running against Jerry Nadler, right? Who is one of the most powerful Democrats. And she is like, I think I can do a better job. I'm not happy with my representation and I'm making it happen. So that's great. Like competition is what we need, right? The reason that these guys aren't working fast enough, aren't getting back to their communities, is because there isn't that kind of like, primary. We saw it with AOC, right? There was just an article out actually, like, is Jerry Nadler the next Joe Crowley? So that it may happen. But, New York City, you're talking about $1 million. But you're also talking about having to do a little bit if you're running against if it's not an open primary, which I don't think there are any in the city, where the incumbent is retiring, you have to figure out some like guerrilla tactics, right? You have to get get a lot of earned media. And so we know what earned media is, in the nonprofit or the biz space. You're not paying for that media, you're getting the media to cover what it is you're talking about, because maybe it's a little bit controversial, maybe it's unique, maybe it's specific to a very particular community, right? So figure out what your earned media strategy is if you're running against an incumbent, because you want to be doing things that are getting attention for what is, a $500,000 ad buy that you're going to get just based on, the media covering you because of your message. You're going to probably get less party support when you're running against an incumbent, especially in a place like New York City. But the good thing about New York City is there's tech money, there's finance money, there's, people of the other party that want to see that person unsuccessful as well. So in a big city like New York, like LA, like Atlanta, you can find that same financial resources, but you're going to have to be really doing that hustle to get outside of the party infrastructure.
Got it. So $1 million on a differentiated message.
Yep.
To get your to get yourself ahead.
And then, at the end of the day, you do have to follow the AOC model, which is she knocked on doors and she said, do you know who your congressperson is? And they said no. And she said, great, I want to be the next one. Right. And so you have that hustle from, as I said earlier, sort of that field beats fundraising, field beats money. Your campaign plan of knocking on doors, no matter what, will always be the big money spend, because like I said at the beginning, at the end of the day, you win by getting one more vote than the other guy.
Yeah. Love that. And just as a quick answer, like for the person who asked the first part of that question, which is like, what are your thoughts on running for Congress? Having never run for, just go for it?
Do it.
All right. Nice and simple. Thank you.
Again, make sure that it is tied to what you care about, right? Yeah. So is Congress the place where you're going to get your legislative agenda complete?
Okay. Great advice. Next question is how do you get political appointment jobs at state level that are typically appointed by the governor if you have no prior political experience?
Yeah. I don't think I think a lot of these appointments are, you don't need a lot of political experience. So I would get your resume together. You really, in this, what you're doing is you have to make sure your resume, your CV is in front of the right hands. So sometimes there's committees that are actually doing these appointments. So doing, again, that little bit of LinkedIn, I would pick up the phone to some of your political friends and say, do you know who's doing these committees? I have a friend who's like in Michigan waiting to be the, like get this appointment from the governor, but like they just haven't even gotten to it yet, right? So this is a cycle that's always happening. So, don't limit your expertise either. So if you're, say you're an expert on like food and agriculture and that's where you really want to get the appointment, but it actually turns out that, you understand small business, like don't limit yourself to one or two things that is your expertise. Make sure your resume and your CV really reflects that you've got these 5 areas that you would love to be a part of a commission or a part of a governor's board or task force. Here, journalists often are spreading this information too. The governor's decided to, create a 15-member task force. Great. It's going to take 4 months before that task force actually gets, to fruition, right? To its second announcement. So, doing that hustle in some states like Massachusetts, they have a database of appointments, but not usually. And so appointments are like a mini campaign. You don't have to raise any money, but you still have to like kind of knock on those virtual doors of picking up the phone and saying, hey, I'm Julie. I've gotten your contact information from, my, friend from college, so-and-so. And he said that you're, looking for, that you're in charge of the appointments process. I want to make sure you have my CV in front of you. Can we have a coffee? Am I talking to the right person? So there is a little bit, it's almost like a mini campaign for an appointment. You're lobbying folks to say, oh, I have someone for that job. In some instances, and this is not standard across 50 states, there is actually a process on the website where you can upload your resume. But like every job, it's also about who you know. So following up, showing up. And this too is where some of the party infrastructure can help.
Got it. Thank you very much. One of the things you talked about briefly was, when it comes to women and minorities, and your organization specifically focuses on getting women to run, or everything you shared, right? The opportunity is huge. The challenges are great. And then there's like some additional extra steps or difficulties potentially and opportunities associated if you're actually representing an underrepresented group of people. So in your opinion, if you had to summarize it maybe for women, minorities, but maybe also others, like, I don't know, foreign nationals and what have you, what would you say are like the key challenges facing these underrepresented groups? And also what are the opportunities and how to overcome the challenges?
Right. So I'm thinking of Peggy Flanagan, who's now the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota. First Native American woman lieutenant governor, one of the highest ranking Native American elected officials. When she ran first for the school board, a race that she lost actually, folks, mostly white folks, said things like, well, are you only going to care about Native American kids, right? Like, racism is real. We have to know how some of these questions are going to come at us, and the preparedness for that, so that your answer is thoughtful, but without being alienating, and also like using a little bit of humor, right? Because at the end of the day, you still want that person to vote for you, whether they're sort of ignorant or not, right? Like, that's a voter. You want to make sure they have a space to come in. So one, preparedness for what, as people of color, as women, things we've been dealing with our whole lives are not going to invisibly, like just disappear when we run for office. In fact, they're going to show up in more ways than one. For women, we find that when sexism happens on the campaign trail, the old advice was like, don't address it, don't address what your opponent's saying, because then people will know you're a woman. But the new advice is like, go at it hard and call it what it is. And so if your opponent, sort of plays in like racist or sexist tropes, then you no longer like let it lie. You actually let the paper know about it. You put it out on, you like call shame on your social media accounts, and you hit back rather quickly. You use it as a fundraising opportunity. So that's something that's sort of changed in the positive, in the sense that like people they want to know when people are acting inappropriate, and they want to know that you're going to fight back. So that's important. you want to talk about how your personal story, like say you're a first generation, say you're an immigrant, you want to talk about how that experience informs what you're going to do. And I think that's been kind of the coolest thing about politics right now, is that people are willing to try out leaders who have different backgrounds and different experiences. But you still have to make your case, right? They're willing to listen in a new way, where they used to be a little bit more just quickly disqualifying, like, I don't vote for women, right? Like, people still say that. But there's this newness about folks who are like, let's try new people and see what kind of outcomes we get, because I haven't been happy with this sort of stagnation and what's been happening over the last, 10, 15 years, or even the last 10 months. So there's you have to be able to bring that story in. You have to be able to say, like, hey, yes, I'm a first and only, and this really matters to my community, and I'm going to bring the voices of my community in, but I want you to also know that I'm a bridge builder. And the last, X years that I've been doing this work, I've successfully brought together this, and this. So you can trust that I'm a really good listener. I mean, I think that, like, some of this, like, ignorance around white folks is that they think it's only, you're going to, like, all of a sudden, like, white people aren't going to matter. It's like, ugh. It's a frustrating thing, but there's a little bit of, like, listen, I know how to do this. I know how to make these communities cohesive. And in fact, like, these communities already are cohesive. Let me show you.
Got it. So I love that. Don't be afraid to show you care about your constituents and who you represent, but the fact that also that's not all you're about. You want to build the bridges. Yeah. Actually noted down this one phrase you said: be prepared and thoughtful without being alienating, and use humor, and that helps. And I think that in one sentence talks a lot about it. And I love also what you said about, like, whether, pick your battles, like, don't necessarily call it out, versus no, actually call it out and say it as it is. So what you're saying now is that it's better if someone is being sexist or racist, like, just actually straight up call it out, as opposed to letting it lie.
And that's actually research from the Barberley Family Foundation, especially about the sexism on the campaign trail. Yeah. Okay. And, to use humor is like, hey, especially for a journalist, when they ask you stupid questions, you need to say things like, hey, did you ask my opponent if they're only going to support white kids on the school board, in their school board seat? And, like, doing that, flip the script. Because especially for journalists, especially for people that should, professionally know better, that ask you those questions, it's like, no.
Flip the script. Love that. Very cool. Somebody actually, Alyssa Rizzo, asked, what if someone has a totally non-traditional background, like a massage therapist or a college dropout? What about that kind of, like, an unusual entry into politics? What are the trends you're seeing there? Or is it still, might be diverse in different ways, but still coming from a certain background?
I mean, you have to be able to show the transfer of skills, right? So, if you're a massage therapist, like, you went through a certification process, right? Like, you've had to do things in order to get there, right? So, it's not like, hairdressers and these people are sort of disqualified because, like, they don't have a very, like, lawyerly background, right? But you have to be able to transfer that into what it is that you care deeply about. So, I'm a massage therapist. Like, I talk to hundreds of people that come through my, I have a window into our entire community, because I talk to hundreds of people everybody gets a massage. So I've heard from, the, like, day laborer whose back hurts at the end of the day, to, like, the mom, like, the pregnant mom. Like, I'm hearing from my community through my work as a massage therapist. And this is, like, I want to represent these voices, right? I don't worry about, like, not having a college degree. I just think that's something that is, I find more the individual who doesn't have the college degree is putting way more pressure on them than the voters have. You are going to have to, like, be able to talk about it in 1 or 2 sentences, but you're going to be able to say, like, I manage my household budget, like, I'm managing this campaign team. You'll have to show a little bit of that experience in another way. And so, again, that's about, like, digging into your background. Like, what have you done before? And if you decide, hey, actually, I don't have enough political experience to run for this, or I like the person who's running, go work on a campaign. Go work on a campaign for a few months, hop on somebody's local campaign to see what it's really about. And then you'll be able to pull up from your own background. Oh, okay. Maybe you've been through the foster care system as a kid, and that's something that you're an expert on. It doesn't matter what you do professionally today, because that's the thing that you're running on, because that was your experience. Maybe you were on like food stamps as a kid, right? Like you can talk about policy because you're the closest person to that policy. So don't negate those experiences. If you grew up in like a really awesome, had a really great childhood with really strong schools, and now you live in a community that you're like, whoa, I want to see better. I get a lot of folks also, mostly white women who are like, hey, I have a lot of privilege and I grew up in I don't have like a strife in the same way to tap into. Then your story is about how you want to build, you have a model community that you want to build, and you want to be a part of making this community a place where like every child can thrive, right? Where everybody has a strong, job and dignity, right? You talk about how you know the levers of change that are necessary to make that possible, especially for folks that have maybe like moved into a new community or moved into like a smaller town. I moved here for a reason. I'm deeply committed. I want to raise my family here. So you just got to get a little bit creative, but it's like flip that in your head. Don't be discounting yourself because you don't have a college degree. Just find other areas that you've been successful and be able to talk about them.
Right. So with that phrase, the transferable skills, right? Even it might seem completely out of the box for you to go into policy, your actual experiences might have given you, what can you draw on that translates into the world of policy? And even if you're an outsider, then how is that an advantage? Like, why does that make you more passionate?
And you're like, great, I can make my own schedule. I'm going to give 110% to this community because I can do massage at 6 o'clock in the morning with my clients if I want, right? Mm-hmm. So you can also use that as an advantage that says most of my full time will go to this. And so there's lots of just creative ways to think about how you're on the advantage.
Got it. Love it. So you've been incredibly generous with your thoughts and your time. I really want to also ask you as a last question, could you share a bit more about Wortbrunn Lead specifically? What's going on at the moment for you? What are you most excited about? And most importantly, how can Ivy members best support you? Everyone who's dialed in today, as well as everybody else who will get the recording of this, what can we do to support you? And how can our members get involved with your organization?
Absolutely. So do the Facebook follow, Twitter share, right? It actually really matters because people are looking for peer-to-peer, right? And we just did this huge thing on May 18th. We train. We have a curriculum. The curriculum is called Run As You Are. We have 60 online resources for you. They're free. You don't have to put your name and email in. And so just plow through those, right? Watch as many as you want. They're built for you. We have a ton of guys who watch all of the webinars. After you've taken some webinars, you can actually join our Facebook group. So we have a Facebook group for alumni. It's a private conversation. And we'll make sure that folks have that as well to join that conversation. We are doing trainings in, Philadelphia. We're doing trainings in just outside in Western Massachusetts. VoteRunLead.org/events is where you're going to see us in person around the country. We actually overlap in a lot of the Ivy cities, so we're going to be doing networking events, and we'll make sure, Barry, that we get that out to your community. Watch the webinars, share the stuff on social. If you have $10 on a donation, we're a 501c3, it's tax deductible. But really dig into the resources. And we also have a certified train the trainer program. If you want to be a trainer with us, that's something that's possible. And just reach out. Our team is very info@runasuare@. My email is Erin@. If you have a question, we have somebody in your community. We have 105 trainers across 35 states. I can get you connected to the right person. And there's just a really good hand holding that we're able to do as we're still, we're small. And so that it's small at the core, but our network is huge. So there's somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody in your community. So there's so many people right now that want to see more women run for office. There's so many people that want to see more diverse folks run for office. So it's the time to just ping, reach out, say, hey, I think I'm nuts. I'm thinking about doing this, but you'll get an answer from us.
Amazing. I think you provided us with two of the rarest things in the world today. One is a super strong call to action, very clear cut. No time like the present, get involved, make a difference. I think this is something all of us need to hear more often. So the fact that you're doing that with us, but also across the country, is an amazing thing. So we're all extremely grateful for that.
Thank you. So glad we were able to do this.
Yeah, and the other thing you gave us are very practical next steps. So really appreciate it, Erin. Excited to support you on your journey and to introduce you to our members over all the months and years to come. So all the best, and see you again very soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks everybody for dialing in. Take care.